David Cronenberg, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. I want to talk first about The Shrouds. You described the film as personal and autobiographical. In the film, the lead character, Karsh, is grieving the loss of his wife, profoundly grieving. You've lost your wife in 2017. Is there something you were exploring in this film that was very personal to you?
Yeah, well, it was the death of my wife was the instigator of this movie. I wouldn't have made this movie. I wouldn't have thought to write it, I don't think, if it hadn't been for that. But I think you can overstress the idea of the personal aspect of it, because I think all art is personal in some way. And all of my movies, even something like A History of Violence, for example, which is set in America and people who are not like me. But there's always a autobiographical element, because it's your life that allows you to understand what your characters are, who they are, how people relate to each other. It's all very personal, and it comes from the way you've lived your own life. So once you start to write the screenplay, it becomes fiction. And yes, you are using material from your own life, partly to construct this fiction, but there's also a lot of fiction.
It seems to fit into the genre for which you are so almost uniquely known, sometimes called body horror. How do you feel about that expression?
Yeah, I don't really like it much, because it's not anything. I've never used that term to describe my own work, but it has stuck, and I'm stuck with it, basically. But I think as a filmmaker, you are filming. What are you filming? You're filming the human body, the face, the body, the voice. The human body is your subject matter. I think it would be something that would be confusing to the to an audience to come into this movie thinking autobiography, because they won't see somebody in the film who's a filmmaker working with actors, for example, as a main character. They'll see somebody who is played by Vincent Cassel, who is an entrepreneur and a techno entrepreneur, and
but his style and dress, they weren't.
Well,
David
I wouldn't say
Cronenberg.
the dress was the same, but no, I had to say that I didn't cast Vincent because of his hair, which is similar to mine. It was really happenstance that I ended up with an actor in the movie that does remind people of me.
Does this film represent a return to the kinds of films you talked about very early and produced very early in your career?
No, I don't think so. I think this is a very realistic film. The early films like Shivers and Rabbit and The Brood, there's a real element of sort of, I wouldn't even say it's sci-fi, but horror elements. This film is pretty realistic. There's a slight techno sci-fi element, which is the creation of these shrouds themselves, which are a sort of a technical invention. But these shrouds could absolutely be made now. I mean, the technology is there to create them if somebody wanted to. So I don't even think it's sci-fi at all, never mind horror.
It seems you've been confident about this trail you've been blazing since you were very young. What made you so sure of yourself?
Well, I don't think I was sure of myself, really. I mean, it's only in retrospect that you can feel that. But when I started out, I had no idea, for example, my father was a writer, and I used to fall asleep to the sound of his typewriter. And for me to think of writing as a career, as an occupation, was just natural in that environment. And my mother was a musician, so that kind of creativity was right there. But I had no idea whether I could be a good filmmaker. Once I got interested in film, inspired partly by the New York Underground rather than, let's say, Hollywood. New York Underground said, just pick up a camera and make a movie. You don't have to go to film school, you don't have to be in Hollywood. And for a Canadian filmmaker at the time, where there was not much filmmaking going on, that was very inspiring. But to think that you could make a movie that would look like a real movie, walk and talk and sound like a real movie with the music track and editing and everything else, I had no idea if I could do that. There was no way to know unless I just tried it.
You watched The Fly, the original Fly movie, as did I when I was in the early 1960s. Sure. I was horrified by what I saw. You eventually remade it. Was there something, because your films are seen sometimes as kind of having a dark or shocking aspect to them, was there something that was inspirational or traumatic for you when you were young that sort of led you down the path that wanted to explore it in that kind of detail?
I don't think more than anybody else. I mean, there comes a time when a child learns that the child will not live forever. When you're a kid, why would you think of such a thing? Yeah. And even worse, that your parents won't live forever and your sister or brother won't live forever. That's pretty difficult. I mean, that's a major turning point in any human's life, and we all go through it. My understanding of human existence is body is reality. I mean, that's a mantra that I created in my last movie, Crimes of the Future. Body is reality. Our reality is our body. And once you start with that, and then you consider that death is inevitable. And if you're an atheist like me, you consider that death is oblivion. I mean, it is the end of you. You disappear. We put all that together, and you have my movies.
And yet you said when you started, you couldn't be sure how that was going to play out, if you had the ability to do it. Was there a point in some of those early films, whether it's Scanners or Videodrome, where you said, I see the path I'm on, it is subversive, and I'm comfortable with that?
Yeah, it wasn't even the idea of the subject matter that was concerning me. It was my ability to be a filmmaker technically. That is to say, do I have an eye? You know, do I know whether this shot is right, or is it the wrong lens and we're in the wrong place for this shot? It's because there's a whole aesthetic sense with film that has to do with photography, motion, lighting, sound, music. And if you're a director, you have to really master most of those things to be considered a good director and to have the control of your craft without even considering what your subject matter is at that point. It's, do you have the craft to make a good movie of whatever it is you want to make? So that was really my concern. And that happened in my first commercial movie. The first day of shooting, I saw what we call the rushes, the dailies, and at first I thought, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. The faces the heads are the wrong size in the frame. The angle is not right. The two shots don't really work together. And I thought, maybe I really don't have the sensibility, the filmmaker's sensibility to make a movie. But then I saw the next days, because we saw 3 days in a row, worth of rushes in a row, got better, and the next day better. So I thought, no, I am getting it. I am getting it. And it was only a 2-week shoot, my first movie. So I didn't have a lot of time to learn. I had to learn fast. And by the end of the movie, I thought, no, I can do this. And what's more, I want to do this.
And did you see yourself as being out of the mainstream, as more subversive in the way you were thinking, approaching films?
Not really, because there were a lot of filmmakers like George Romero, for example, and John Carpenter. There were young filmmakers, not Canadian, but American mostly, and British, who were making genre pictures. They were making horror films. And I thought, at the time, if you were making a horror film, you have to understand, anywhere but Canada, if you're making a horror film, you could get it financed because it would be a low-budget film that had an audience. And at one point, I thought I was going to have to move to the U.S. And I took the idea of my first movie, Shivers, to the U.S. I went to Roger Corman. I went to American International Pictures. They were two companies that were making low-budget horror films, and I thought, my idea was very well received, and I thought, okay, I'm maybe going to have to move to the U.S. Got back to Toronto to discover that the Canadian Film Development Corporation, which later became Telefilm, had agreed with Cinepix in Montreal that they would finance Shivers, that they would put money into Shivers. That's what kept me in Canada. Otherwise, I would have been an American filmmaker.
And you wanted to remain a Canadian filmmaker in Canada because you've stayed in Toronto. We see Toronto in the backdrop of your films.
Yeah, I really preferred to stay in Canada. I really felt that my sensibility was Canadian and different from the US. I don't think in the US they imagined that Canadians were different, but I really could feel it when I went to America, how different it was.
Your films seem to have a different sensibility from what many would feel is the mainstream. And yet when we hear you, when we see you, and you seem such like a well-adjusted Canadian sense of humor, it almost affects how I feel I should view the films, because there's almost a twinkle in your eye to meet you. And then I think then I should see the film in that way.
I think you should. I've had this experience several times at the Cannes Film Festival, where the audience there is very respectful because of the pomp and the pageantry and the glamour of Cannes, and they feel, for example, that to laugh at your film because of the humor might be disrespectful. Also, there's the language thing, but my films are funny, and I think The Shrouds is also funny. I mean, you can talk about the grief angle and so on, which is the most obvious angle, but it's a funny movie.
You said at one time you didn't like to look back at your films because it felt like you were watching a documentary of your work. Yeah. Has enough time passed that you can look back on your work and decide that there are some that you liked more than others?
I really don't have the impulse to look at my old films, but maybe if I live to be 100, I might decide to do that.
How do you feel about the persona that seems to be around you? Like there's Cronenbergian, observations of films that are that have that name attached to it. There was a Rick and Morty cartoon that created little creatures called Cronenbergs. It's kind of an honor. How do you feel?
Well, it is. I mean, because of course I love Federico Fellini, and we all understand what people mean when they say something is Fellini-esque. And I thought, well, the ultimate accolade would be that your name becomes an adjective, So whether it's Cronenbergian or Cronenbergundian, which I kind of prefer, but nobody seems to like, but Fellini-esque, yes. Kafka-esque, yes, of course. And it's not something that I particularly understood or aspired to as I was beginning to make films, but in retrospect, I prefer that to being the creator of the body horror genre. Let's put it that way.
There were films you didn't make that you could have made, like Top Gun. How different might that have been?
Well, and how about Flashdance? I was really pursued to make Flashdance, and I really couldn't understand why the producer really wanted me to do that. I thought I probably would have destroyed that film somehow. But well, these were. I took it as a positive appraisal of my skills as a director. That the producers of those films were interested in me as a director. What they didn't understand about me, and why should they, but was that I didn't, unless I really had an intimate connection somehow, subconsciously, unconsciously, in whatever way, I knew that I wouldn't make a good film. And so I was kind of protecting them by turning those films down, actually. But something like, let's say, History of Violence or Eastern Promises, which were written by other people and were another genre besides horror, for various reasons, I could relate to those films, those projects, and I felt that I could bring some really interesting, positive things to those films.
You've been so prolific. It doesn't seem you've had enough time to do anything else. But were there any paths not taken that you might have wished to?
Yeah, there was a project based on a Robert Ludlum spy novel called The Matarizzi Circle, and I talked to Tom Cruise and I talked to Denzel Washington, and we were going to make that movie for MGM. And I had written a script based on the novel, which was quite different from the novel, but still related to it. I thought that's what we were supposed to do. And he said, no, we want to do Raiders of the Lost Ark Go to Mars. And I said, oh, well, I wish you had told me that before, because that's not a movie I want to make. Yeah. So I left the project.
I want to ask you about where filmmaking is going, but first, just given your experience and what you've contributed to filmmaking, how would you say that filmmaking has evolved during your time of making films?
Well, I think it's much more accessible, filmmaking, because you can literally make a film with your phone, and you can edit on your laptop. And the technology has really come down to the level of consumerism, of the consumer grade. When I was starting to make films, the equipment was pretty intimidating, even just to shoot 16 millimeter film. And now all of that is very accessible. And then there are strange and interesting new ways to release your work let's say, a short filmmaker. So there's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's all those things. I think it's really become much more accessible. And I think there are a lot of people who have become filmmakers who would not have become filmmakers when I was starting out because of the inaccessibility of the technology.
No, you've talked about Darwinism, I think, in terms of filmmaking. Is there something about how you view filmmaking and what will develop in the future, either your own or in the industry itself, for how films will be made?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I know enough about the industry per se. I mean, I'm here in Toronto. I'm making films pretty much the way we always made films, except now we're shooting digitally. And I'm very thankful for that. I have no love of film, actually. I preferred the digital version of film by far. You have so much more control. It's just a better medium. But beyond that, I'm not an industry person. I don't really have much. I've seen myself often described as a Hollywood filmmaker, and I kind of not really. I think the longest I've ever spent in Hollywood was 6 weeks when I was doing the sound mix for the Dead Zone. So yeah, not a Hollywood filmmaker.
How would you like your legacy to be viewed, or how would you view it?
Oh, I'm not worried about it. Once I'm dead, it's not going to be a problem.
Well, okay, but you have years ahead of you, let's say. But
it's coming along fine. I'll accept the body horror. In fact, amusingly, the former film critic Janet Maslin, former film critic of New York Times, phoned me and started to talk to me and said she wanted to do an interview with me. And I thought that's strange because she'd sort of only been doing literary reviews, and she had quit as the film critic of the time. And then I realized she was going to be writing my obituary for the New York Times. That's what she wanted to talk about. And she said, in the first paragraph, there's going to be the term body horror. I said, I understand. So I guess that's my legacy.
Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Sure, a pleasure. Thanks.